I think it's good that we finally met after a long time. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me, Gibbs.
So this is Mr. Douglas Rogers, the author of 2 Weeks in November, the Astonishing Untold Story of the operation that toppled Robert Mugabe. So we are here today, and hopefully he's going to tell us why he decided to write this book. So my first question is, what actually inspired you to write this book?
So as I mentioned in the introduction and a couple of later chapters, is I'm a journalist, a travel writer, and a memoirist. I'm not really a political reporter, a news reporter, or an analyst, but I happen to be in Zimbabwe. I'm from Zimbabwe. I grew up there. My parents lived there. I have a lot of family there, and I visited Zimbabwe at this exact time by complete coincidence. And I was there to write another book. I was there to write a travel story about a road trip I was taking from Zimbabwe through Mozambique with some friends, 3 friends of mine. And it was going to be a bit like the movie The Hangover, 4 guys in midlife crisis on an adventure. And a couple of days into the trip into Mozambique, on this road trip, we heard that the Vice President, Mnangagwa, had been fired. A few days later, he arrives in South Africa and says that he escapes the country. He arrives in South Africa, says he's going to be back in 2 weeks, which I thought was ludicrous. A few days after that, there was the famous press conference by General Chiwenga saying, basically a threat to President Mugabe and his wife, the Grace. And when that happened, I knew that something big was going to go down in Zimbabwe, and I told my friends, let's go back for that. And I returned to Zimbabwe, took a couple of days in time for the military had already intervened. I think it was on the Tuesday. I returned on the Wednesday or the Thursday. I was there for the big march on the Saturday, and witnessed what seemed like a movie. I don't know if you were there at the time, but something incredible was happening. It was very, it was like a hidden world was in operation. And I came back to the US where I live, and I pitched and wrote a magazine story about it. But it was a very conventional story about the events that had happened over those 2 weeks and the ultimate resignation of Mugabe after 37 years. And then I pitched it to my publishers in the UK and in South Africa and in the US, and I said I could write a book about this. And I returned to Zimbabwe. They said, that's great, let's write a book. And the original intention was to write about the road trip and how that was curtailed by this real life adventure, this revolution. And then researching the book, I knew I needed to speak to the military in Zimbabwe who had carried out this operation. But no one spoke to me. No one in the military speaks about it. And by complete chance, I got from 2 different people a number of someone in South Africa, and these
who then connected you to some of the characters.
Who connected me to a completely new world.
And then the title itself, 2 Weeks in November. What does it mean?
So the 2 weeks were the 2 weeks that it took from Mnangagwa to leave the country to his return to Harare, and he was inaugurated a few days later. That was actually, I think, 15 or 16 days, but I like the preciseness of 2 weeks in November.
So now, if you can give us a summary of the characters. Some of the characters are unbelievable.
Yes.
We've got Casper, who is a CIO agent, and then we've got Gabriel Shumba, we've got Chris Mtsangwa.
Right.
We've got all these people who seem to have different backgrounds. And they are in your book here. Tell us a bit about them.
Okay, so the way I wanted to write the book, I was in Zimbabwe for the period, right? Well, for most of that period. And what struck me was I felt like I was living in a movie. I felt like it was incredibly nerve-wracking, but incredibly exhilarating and exciting. And everything that unfolded seemed to be going according to some bizarre plan. And this is Zimbabwe. It's a country in deep trouble economically. It's seen better days, right? And yet everything was so precise. It worked according to some big plan, right? And finding these characters, I realized that I wanted to write about Zimbabwe as a human story, as character, but this period is a story about, less about politics, but more about human interactions. And this goes for the political players, it goes for the characters I uncovered who were operating mostly out of Johannesburg. I wanted to write about these guys as human beings caught up in a game. Okay, these
And
guys
one
were
of the
put
big players is Tom Ellis.
So yeah, this is the number I was given in Harare and by a friend, a businessman friend in Mutare. It was a number and a name, a cell phone number and a name. And I say in the book it's not his real name, but I mentioned in the book that one of them gave me a first name called Tom. The other guy, the next day, gave me a name Ellis, and it was the same cell phone number. So I called that number. And the guy is a white Zimbabwean living in South Africa, had been involved in opposition politics for a long time. And he began to tell me on a phone call what he had done in the coup, what he said my side. I'll tell you what my side did. And I listened to the story, and it involved him meeting and befriending a CIO agent sent down from Harare to assassinate him.
And that's Casper.
That's Casper. This is a guy called Casper. And it's this unlikely friendship that develops between these two over many months and many beers, which he says that he turned Casper will say the other thing, but they became friends. And an interesting thing I point out is that both their fathers were policemen, okay? And what they end up doing is starting a team. They bring together a team of rivals, basically. It's almost
After
like
writing the Northgate Declaration.
they already got these, some of these
yeah.
guys together when they wrote this Northgate Declaration, which is these two guys, almost like cowboys, you know, a black Zimbabwean CIO agent and a white Zimbabwean, ex-Zimbabwean businessman, sitting in a truck in a parking lot in Johannesburg to say, we've got a plan.
Yeah. And the plan was basically to stage a coup.
Well, you see that there's a bit of their plan. They couldn't stage a coup. There's obviously these guys are
Using
not
other
able
people to do it.
Well, what their plan ended up being, okay, is that they wanted to support Mnangagwa. They wanted to support the Lacoste faction and have Mnangagwa as the new president of Zimbabwe. And at first, and this goes for, I believe, Gabriel and some of these other guys who were caught up in it, it was activism. They were involved in activism, and they thought this could take a long time. But their idea was the MDC had no hope of winning an election. They were weak and fractured, and Grace and the G40 faction were on the rise, and they felt, in real politic terms, that they were far worse than Lacoste Mnangagwa. And they ended up backing Mnangagwa, but then bringing in very powerful players like Chris Muchangwa to spin this operation and to run the media, international diplomacy, communications, which became pivotal to the events that the military carried out.
So their planning started in 2016, you know.
Yeah, I think
that's how the book actually.
Yeah, and I think in the book, Casper and Ellis meet in 2015, end of 2015.
Yeah.
So they've been meeting, I think it was about 6 months of meeting in bars and taverns and getting to know each other, and then finding this common ground. They, at this point though, Ellis, who was active in opposition politics, had already been meeting with Christopher Muchangwa and the war veterans, senior war veterans, and other government ministers or other senior people within ZANU-PF connected to the Lacoste faction.
And apparently Casper is the guy who was the bodyguard of the late Mokenzongerai.
Well, this is what is...
It was once beaten up at Harvest House. Right?
So this is what I reveal in the book, how powerful and how pervasive the intelligence apparatus is in Zimbabwe. I found that everyone fears the CIO, right? But I think what I found, and I've been followed in Zimbabwe, and everyone's been followed by these sort of guys in suits and dark glasses, but you think they're a little bit stupid and ridiculous. But researching the book, you realize that they're very powerful people, very skilled at what they do, and they had infiltrated the MDC. I think that was one reason why the MDC never won elections, or were always, ZANU-PF, Mugabe, were always one step ahead of the MDC. And I think partly it's because guys like Casper had infiltrated them and knew what they were up to. And this is how Zimbabwe politics has worked, I think, since at least 2000, probably before, but it works on this a powerful intelligence apparatus and informer network, which basically is able to predict and understand what the opposition party is doing.
And Mnangagwa was glued into all these kind of...
Yeah, well, he ran he ran the intelligence operations in the early 1980s. So he was part of the establishment of this powerful intelligence apparatus right from the beginning.
And this poisoning then came into play, and it led to the coup actually.
Well, I mentioned how Casper warns Christopher Muchangwa that there's going to be an attempt to poison Mnangagwa. And that happens in the Gwanda rally when he's starts vomiting and is taken by helicopter, I think originally to Gweru, then Harare, then to Johannesburg to get treatment for poison. But again, this is what Casper is saying, this is what they're going to do, and this is exactly what happened.